Hello there, I'm Black Bright News, as you know, and I wanted to talk about the homeless people now being allowed to have bank accounts. So I'm going to read you my story and hopefully it lands well. For years, we have made up our minds about the homelessness. We have said the problem is housing or addiction or mental health or personal failure, depending on who's speaking. But beneath all of that sits something more basic, more bureaucratic, and not discussed very much. It's the exclusion from everyday systems, in particular banking. In the January 2026 edition of Psychologies, there was a piece about moves in the UK to give people experiencing homelessness access to banking without requiring a fixed address. On the surface, it sounds administrative, but in reality, it touches almost every part of how someone survives, stabilizes, and eventually exits homelessness. If you don't have a fixed address, most banks won't let you open an account. No account means no safe place to keep money, no debit card, no direct debit, no standing orders, no digital footprint. And in 2026, that effectively means no access to modern life. Benefits are harder to receive, wages are harder to pay, charities struggle to transfer funds, employers hesitate, landlords won't engage. Even basic things like setting up a phone contract or accessing cheaper utilities becomes impossible. Cash becomes the default, and cash is fragile. It gets stolen, it gets lost, it marks you as vulnerable, and it keeps you visible in ways that aren't safe. So the argument for change is straightforward. If homelessness is not just a housing issue, but a systems issue, then removing unnecessary barriers is not charity, it's logical. By allowing people without fixed addresses to open up basic bank accounts, the state and financial institutions reduce friction at every point of support. Benefits can be paid reliably, emergency grants can be issued quickly, people can budget, however modestly, and crucially, support agencies can work with someone who has a stable financial anchor, even if their living situation isn't yet stable. From this point of view, banking access is infrastructure, just like access to a GP or an ID document. It's a foundation that makes everyone else more likely to succeed. You don't fix homelessness by giving someone a bank card, but you make it far harder to fix homelessness without one. There's also a dignity argument. When someone is excluded from banking, they're not just inconvenienced, they're told indirectly, but clearly, that you don't qualify as a full participant in society. That message compounds shame, it reinforces isolation, and it quietly trains people to expect rejection before they even apply. Giving someone a bank account does not solve trauma, addiction, or poverty, but it does say you exist within the system. You are recognised. You're not invisible. Banks are regulated entities. Address verification has long been a part of how risk is managed. Remove that requirement, and the fear is that accounts could be used for criminal activity or that systems designed for inclusion could be exploited. Critics worry about fraud, money laundering, and misuse. There's also a worry that the change in banking rules that allows people experiencing homelessness to open bank accounts without needing a fixed address risks being treated as progress when it doesn't fix the core problem. A bank account doesn't provide a home, healthcare, or long term support, and there's a concern that administrative changes can be used to signal action while deeper issues remain unresolved. These concerns are valid. Financial systems do need safeguards, and homelessness does require far more than access to banking. But the key question is whether these risks outweigh the cost of exclusion. From what we already know, exclusion is not neutral, it actively worsens outcomes. People without bank accounts are more likely to be exploited, more likely to rely on unsafe intermediaries, and more likely to remain stuck in informal economies that make recovery harder, not easier. What's interesting is that the models being discussed rely on alternative forms of verification. letters from councils or recognised charities, use of care of addresses, tiered accounts with limited functionality at first. In other words, managed inclusion, not reckless access. Systems tend to work better when they assume good faith and manage risk, rather than assuming bad faith and managing exclusion. Most people experiencing homelessness are not trying to game the system, they're trying to survive it. Modern poverty is increasingly digital. The cheapest options, the fastest support, the most efficient services all assume online access and electronic payment. If you're locked out of banking, you're locked out of affordability. You pay more for everything. You queue longer. You rely on goodwill instead of rights. So when we talk about giving homeless people access to banking, we're really talking about whether society accepts a permanent underclass operating in cash and crisis, or whether we're willing to design systems that meet people where they are, not where we wish they were. This policy shift also challenges a deeper cultural reflex, the idea that stability must come before trust. Traditionally, we say get housed first, then we'll treat you like a normal citizen. But stability often comes after trust, not before it. You give someone tools and they're more likely to build something with them. That doesn't mean being naive, it means recognizing that deprivation is not a moral failing, and that complexity doesn't justify paralysis. From a human interest perspective, the impact is tangible. A person who can receive money securely can plan. A person who can show a bank statement can apply. A person who doesn't have to carry cash can sleep a little safer. These are not abstract gains, they're daily lived improvements that don't require waiting years for housing stock to increase. Legally, this kind of inclusion also aligns with principles already bedded in public policy: proportionality, equality of access, and reasonable adjustment. If systems systematically exclude a group with a known vulnerability, adapting those systems is not special treatment, it's compliance with the spirit of fairness the law already claims to uphold. The danger, of course, is complacency. Banking access must not become the headline that replaces housing, healthcare, and long-term support. It should be framed honestly as one necessary piece in a much larger puzzle. But necessary pieces matter. Without them, the whole structure collapses. What this really tests is whether we can deal with complexity instead of relying on simple sound bites. Homelessness needs a big long-term structural solutions, but that doesn't mean smaller system changes don't matter. Both can be true at the same time, and small changes can make a real difference to someone's life, even while the larger problem remains. This change is not yet a legal requirement for all banks to offer address-free accounts, but a government-backed pilot program is actively expanding access so that in practice, more people without fixed addresses can open bank accounts with support. That's why you might see different descriptions in the media and advocacy pieces. Some talk about pilot rolling out, others describe it as a real change happening now in specific banks. We need to bear in mind that removing the requirement for a fixed address to open a bank account does not end homelessness, but it does remove a silent wall that has trapped people on the wrong side of recovery for decades. And sometimes the most humane reforms are not the loudest ones. They are the ones that quietly let people back in. Black Bright News examines social policy through lived reality rather than political branding, focusing on how systems operate in practice and who they leave behind when they don't. So I thought it was very interesting. I think it's a fantastic initiative to give homeless people access to a bank account. I'm not quite sure how it will work in principle, but I'm sure they've done their homework, and I'm sure that the homeless people who have access to a bank account, and I'm not quite sure if it'll be everyone, they'll be much happier. And that's all I've got to say for now. I hope you found it interesting.